For nearly 30 years, he stood tall in the famous number 43 pit. It was his job to guide the King to victory, which he did more often than not. To his rivals, he was tough. To his team, he was an unquestioned leader. And to the race fans, he would be forever a part of NASCAR history. Join us as we take a look at the successful career of Dale Inman, next on Men Behind the Wrenches. During the golden years of Petty Enterprises, you always heard three names: driver Richert Petty, his brother Maurice, and crew chief cousin Dale Inman. Inman was an integral part of the Petty story, but he found success outside the family as well. Hello and welcome to Men Behind the Wrenches. I'm your host, Jeff Hammond. Dale Inman was one of those rare mechanics whose contributions went way beyond what he could do with a car. His success as a person and a competitor made him a giant among men. Growing up a cousin to the famous Petty family around Level Cross, North Carolina, Dale Inman didn't have a choice but to become involved in racing. If he wanted to hang out with his cousins, Maurice and Richert, he was going to have to be around cars.
We was in our mid-teens, and I grew up here in Level Cross with the Petty family, and Lee happened to be a racer. And when I come over to visit or rode my bicycle over, and before Maurice and us could play, Maurice and Richert and myself, before we could play or ride our bicycles or shoot basketball or throw football or throw baseball, we had to have his race car ready. And if I helped a little bit, then that made them get through quicker.
During the early days of Petty Enterprises, the youngsters, Dale, Richert, and Maurice, had no idea they would become a part of history. There was just one influence on the group: the family patriarch, Lee Petty.
You know, Lee was a big influence on all of us. I mean, because I went to the races like 8 years before Richert ever drove. I guess I just picked up on some of the stuff. But Lee was a big influence, you know what I mean? He wanted it done right and everything.
In 1961, Lee would be hurt in a crash at Daytona. As he recovered, sons Maurice and Richert, along with cousin Dale, would find themselves in the awkward position of regrouping and bringing Petty Enterprises back to prominence. At this point, Dale became crew chief.
I was 23 years old when Dad had his wreck in '61, and we basically didn't have any sponsors. We had 2 race cars and went to Daytona and tore up both of them. We went into the hospital. You know, he was about out of it, really. He said, go home, get another car and get ready, and me and your mother will be home about Friday. He was home Friday in about 4 months, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was still pressure, but it was fun, and you had to learn and know what the other people could do and what you could do and what Richert was capable of doing, and we went from there.
By 1964, after struggling to find their rhythm, things started to click for Dale and Richert.
When Richert started driving, it was just a thing that we'd work on the race car, and we expected Richert to drive it and drive it hard, and we expected to win with Richert. And there were several years there that where Plymouth, you know, probably didn't have a good enough motor to run on the super speedways, but he learned the drafting technique very good, you know. And then '64, of course, we got a good body in the Hemi, and we set sail then.
1964 would be one of those magical years. Starting with a victory in the Daytona 500, Inman and Petty would win 9 times. The victories would add up to a championship. It was a milestone that Inman and Petty approached methodically.
I don't even think I thought about it, and I'm not sure that Richert thought about it. I think we went down and we looked at the schedule and say, okay, we got a race here today, and then we got to be here next week. And it was really no big deal, and it wasn't that much money, but it still was a championship.
Daytona is the biggest race of the year. It happens in February, the only race in the whole world, so the whole world looks at Daytona. And if you can win there, you don't have to win the rest of the year. You're a winner all year long. And so it was a big deal to win Daytona, and even a bigger deal probably to win my first championship.
Inman and Petty had put Petty Enterprises back on track, but 1964 would only be the foundation of future successes. Dale and Richert used the next 2 seasons to refine their program and sharpen their race skills. The team would combine for 12 wins, ramping up toward 1967. That season would be historic. By spring, Richert would break his father's career win record, earning his 55th victory. In total, a record 27 wins, including 10 in a row, along with the championship, made Inman, Petty, and their car, Old Blue, legends.
The car that we used, it had a 67 grill in it, but it was really a 66 model car. The 67 that we built was not as good a race car as a 66, and it created the nickname Old Blue, you know, and they said, well, here comes Old Blue, and it just seemed to click, you know, we just seemed like we couldn't do no wrong.
Winning 10 in a row was a record that has stood the test of time. For Dale, the pressure of the streak got to him.
Richard always said there ain't no pressure on you, you know what I mean, but I felt pressure, I don't know, and I'm sure he did too.
Some of the races, probably 6 or 8 of them, we probably should have won. There was 3 or 4 of them in there we shouldn't have won. So it was circumstances beyond our control. We wound up winning 10 races.
As Bill Elliott would later become famous for saying, it was just a combination. They had a combination that was very, very tough to beat. And as much as can go wrong, you have to be super, super good to win that many races. It was a remarkable season.
Dale and Richert had rewritten stock car racing history. During this time, their relationship grew beyond just being cousins and co-workers.
As far as motivating Richard, I never had to motivate Richard. I used to get on to him pretty heavy about if we had a real good race car, him kind of toying with people or letting people get too close to him, and maybe him not understanding that I was scared they was going to take him out or something, raced him hard when maybe he could put a few car links on him.
Communications was really, really good. You didn't have all the technology and all this stuff. You just had some basic stuff that you done, and Dale and myself worked on the race car. My brother worked on the engines. When Dale and myself thought the same way. So when I'd make a comment or he'd make a comment, then we knew what we was talking about, and we knew what the other one was talking about. So we'd have a knockdown carry out, but we were both after the same thing, and that was to win races.
As the 70s approached, Dale and Richert continued to set the standard in NASCAR. With the 70s came a new era in NASCAR racing, and the pace would be set by Petty Enterprises. Top mechanics would come to level cross to hone their skills and to learn under Dale Inman's tutelage. But to survive the experience, they had to live up to Dale's standards.
It don't take you long to find out whether they're really interested enough, and they don't have to be mechanically. If they're interested enough and want to do it, they can do it. If you do a lot of things, you're going to make mistakes. The only people who don't make mistakes are the people who don't do nothing.
He took me from a kid to a young man, and gave me the dedication in life to see that I had a good career, possibly ahead of me. And for what he taught me, money can't buy.
Back then, you know, strict was tough. You know, you're not doing your lollygogging thing like you always do. So just making sure you stuck to a plan, you know, being organized, presenting yourself at the racetrack to someone that, you know, they wanted to be respected.
He was one of the last guys to leave the shop, the first in every morning, and he knew what he had to do.
As the decade progressed, Petty Enterprises was nearly unbeatable. They would win 4 hotly contested championships in 5 years. In each title chase, they defeated their closest competitors, names like David Pearson, Bobby Allison, and the feisty Cale Yarborough, during the peak of rivalries in NASCAR. During the 1972 championship, things really heated up with Bobby.
Some of the races got, in the middle of the year, got kind of close. It just so happens that we were the best 2 cars at most of the races. And you wind up coming right down to the end of the race, and here we are. One's in front of the other, or one's right behind the other one, or whatever. And you're going to do everything you can to win the race without knocking the guy completely out of the race. I mean, you don't lean on him a little bit, get him out of shape, get by him, and then he'd lean on you. And, you know, in 2 or 3 races there, it got to be, you know, pretty fierce.
Dale had led the Petty crew to 6 championships. In 1979, the duo's biggest test would come as they battled Darrell Waltrip for the crown. The title would come down to the final race of the year in a barn burner.
That's one of them things where Rich said, well, there ain't no pressure on us, you know what I mean? God darn, there was some pressure on me.
He went in with a 2-point lead. Well, I talked to Buddy Baker before the race, and we started up front somewhere. I don't even know where Darrell started. And I told Buddy, I said, if we get going here, let me lead a lap, because that's 5 points, okay? So we got out there, and Buddy pulled over and let me go by, and I passed him, so I got to 5 points. So all of a sudden, I'm 3 points ahead of him, okay? So then I let Buddy back, and then we raced some more, and we had a caution flag, and so we come down pit road and start. When Darrell stays on the racetrack to get those 5 points back, he comes in and makes a pit stop when he's back in the pack. Well, they throw the green flag and we take off. Well, when he's back there with somebody and they spin out or spin him out, okay, because he's back in the pack running with people he shouldn't be back there with. And he got so cautious or so point-minded that he got in trouble.
I didn't realize how important the championship was, although like at 79, when that one got away from me, I let Richert beat me out of that one. And that was just because I didn't use my head enough.
They made some mistakes. You know, the last race in Ontario for the championship, well, they went to Las Vegas one day. They was pretty confident, and we stayed there and practiced. And we had some trouble with the car pushing real bad, and then finally we hit it, and they got busier. But you know, it's just, I don't know, we won the championship. That's all I can say.
With 7 Winston Cup titles, Dale Inman had led Petty Enterprises into their golden era. They dominated the sport in the 70s, but as the 80s approached, their reign would be challenged. After winning 7 Winston Cup championships in 20 years, the king would be challenged as the 80s began. Dale Inman continued to steer the team as they managed 2 wins in 1980. Richard's son, Kyle, entered the picture as he turned to driving under the family umbrella. As Speed Weeks in 1981 approached, Inman was looking for an edge.
They downsized the cars in '81, and we was going back to the, I believe it was a Dodge Diplomat. And we still had some, you know, Dodge motors and things, so we built a Dodge Diplomat. We went down there, and they'd done been down there driving the downsized cars, and I think Greg Sachs had turned end over end in Childress's car, and everybody was spinning out, and they was having all kind of trouble with them. And we didn't know what to expect, and Richard said, okay, I'm going out, so don't expect too much of me the first time out, because I'm not going to try to run it very hard. So he goes out, and I think he runs 175 mile an hour. And he said, no, wait a minute. He said, I'll run the car wide open. Just go. He said, that's as fast as it's going to run. So then we was in trouble. So we built a Buick for Kyle. And so we come home and cut that car up and put a Buick body on it in something like a week, I think, and then went back with a Buick Regal. And then, of course, Bobby's sneaked in with the Le Mans, and
Allison's Le Mans would grab the headlines as Inman and Petty struggled. When the race began, Allison took off, but as the day unfolded, Inman would have a chance to capitalize on Allison's misfortune and help Richert win the race.
We'd start off, and they'd be 8 or 10 that'd take off as a group, and then the first thing you know, we'd get down to 4 or 5 of us, and 4 or 5 of us would run in a group, and then the first thing you know, Bobby'd get away from that group. Just over a period of time, he was just a little bit better, and he'd get away.
And I believe I told Richard somewhere during the halfway of the race, I said, Richard, we're not wearing no tires. The tires are not wearing at all. And they're not picking us up any. I said, I don't know what it'll come down to at the end of the race. Just bear with me. And I do remember saying that to him.
Right before the last pit stop, the last 100 miles, right after, we had about 70, 80 miles to go or something, 60 miles, whatever. Anyhow, everybody was having to make another pit stop. Well, they ran a little bit too far and ran out of fuel, I think going up the backstretch or something, so he had to coast around a little bit. Well, that caught us all up from that standpoint, and we let everybody else pit. Now, this is one of Dale's deals where he was so good at helping to win races. And so he said, okay, let everybody else pit. So but when Bobby came in, he got 2 tires and a full tank of fuel. Dale said, okay, pit next time. So I started down pit road, and he says, 1 can of gas. And at that time, I said, we won the race. I mean, that's when I knew we won the race. When he said, we're going to get 1 can of gas, I said, okay, that's a winner. Coming off the 4th turn, the last lap, the thing ran out of gas. And I never said anything to anybody. I just went ahead and done the whole deal because I didn't want to make a spectacular deal out of it, you know what I mean? One of them guys think we had plenty of gas.
I think Bobby pitted first and changed tires. Well, the rest of them just kind of followed suit. I said, you know. we'll put a can of gas in and go. And I think Richard ran out of gas coming down to get the checker. He said he liked to broke his leg when he pushed the clutch in. But there again, it was a big win.
Inman's pit call to win the 500 wasn't his first decision that won Richert Petty a race, but that Sunday afternoon sealed his legend as a master of race strategy.
One thing about racing, it's hard to sit down and do like the coaches do at the sidelines on a football game and have your play. Because you can have all the plays you want to, and just one little incident or a caution flag a lap before what you figure or a lap after. So you got to be very versatile and make a quick decision on whatever the circumstance, and that's what Dale done.
For Inman, as the team he loved celebrated another Daytona 500 win, he wrestled to make a decision that would change everything. Whether to leave his family, the Pettys, and pursue other opportunities. It was a tough decision, but Dale had decided after nearly 30 years, it was time for a new challenge.
You knew there was something up when Richard won the Daytona 500 and Dale Inman was crying. Dale Inman is one of those people that doesn't show a lot of emotion on the outside. He holds it in.
That was a pretty emotional deal because Dale, that was one of the last races. I think Dale stayed with us one more race. But he done told me before the race that, hey, I'm going to go do something else. And so, after 30 years or something, it was kind of hard to take, but, that's life, so we got to keep moving on.
I didn't talk about it much back then, and it certainly wasn't my salary, and it certainly wasn't Richard. There was just some things that Rod Osterand had come to me and offered me a job, and there was just some changes I thought that I had to make.
An era would be over at Petty Enterprises, but like all families, they would continue moving forward. After spending a year and a half with the Osterland team and Dale Earnhardt, Inman landed at Hagan Enterprises as crew chief for Terry Labonte. By 1984, Dale would find himself in another championship battle, this time with Labonte.
Well, it was a close race all the way through, and we wound up, there was 4 or 5 drivers in it, Bobby and Darrell and Harry Gant and us and maybe a couple more, and they just kind of weeding out till it come down to Terry and Harry. And fortunate enough, it wound up on a road course, and Terry was probably a better road course driver than Harry, and it kind of fell in our hands.
Well, I think the biggest thing that Dale did for us was he had a knack for surrounding himself with good people. And you could look at the team that we had back in 1984 and look at the people that we had on that team, and a lot of them are still involved in racing today that are very successful. But he did a good job at really getting a lot of good people on that team, and then he was good at, working with everybody and things like that, and let those guys do their jobs, but overseeing the whole thing there. And it worked good.
Dale Inman had climbed out of the King's shadow, winning another championship. Over the next 3 seasons, Dale would win 3 more times to become the winningest crew chief of all time. In 1985, he would return home to Petty Enterprises.
Yeah, I don't know who's second. I mean, that's how far ahead he is in winning championships. He was with me on 7 championships. He won a championship with Terry Labonte. Then together we won, 198 races, I guess.
But with all his successes, Dale's favorite moment has nothing to do with any record, but with family. It was the day he was called upon to help out Adam Petty.
I spotted for Adam in the Busch race, and that was big. And I wasn't supposed to do it, and I got there. My son-in-law was down there spotting for John, and he got pneumonia, so he had to come home. So they brought me down to spot for John, and about 2 hours before the race, Kyle said, "Will you spot for Adam?" And that sticks out big.
For over 30 years, Dale Inman was a giant in NASCAR, a man with a fierce drive and a huge heart.
I think when you look at the number of years that he had spent around the sport was why he was so good at what he did.
You had to respect him. He gave 100% all the time. And really and truly, every time Richert Petty's name is mentioned, Dale Inman should be mentioned also.
Still to this day, Dale has a demeanor about him that, you know, when he comes in the garage area, you know, he's very well respected. And being involved with the Petties and, you know, championships with Richert and then moving over and doing our thing, yeah, he's right there at top.
Dale is such a tough competitor. He's so intense, but inside, he's the softest, sweetest, nicest guy you'll ever meet. And he'd probably kill me when he hears me say that. But, you know, I think that's the biggest thing. There's a time when you have to have that intensity. There's a time when you have to hold that competitive level. And you have to think about it all the time to get to where you want to go.
When you go back and look at a guy that won 200 races, you know, 10 in a row, 27 in one season, he's the best crew chief that has ever been in racing, in my opinion.
Richert Petty never done anything by himself, okay? Dale Inman never done anything by himself. Maurice Petty never done anything by himself. But as a group, and the other people that we had supporting, we had the best group.
I got a lot of fond memories. And you know, you asked me how I wanted to be remembered. I want my grandkids to remember that, you know, that part of it. So, you know, Dale was with Richert, you know, when all of it happened.
With 8 Winston Cup championships and over 200 wins, Dale Inman's record speaks for itself. A humble man, Dale is still overwhelmed at his own success and happy to share in the Petty legacy. Along the way, he became a role model for all who dream to ascend to the championship level of NASCAR Winston Cup racing. For Men Behind the Wrenches, I'm Jeff Hammond. Thanks for joining us.